Bright QT. Every student matters.
Hello everyone. So let's start our new topic here, that is Cabinet Mission Plan. Now students, this is the last topic for this chapter, and before this topic you have learnt a lot of new things, right? You already have learnt a lot about nationalism, the rise of nationalism in India. But in this chapter we have covered the major movements that took place in this struggle movement, be it the non-cooperation movement, be it the civil disobedience movement, be it the Simon Commission or Go Back Simon movement, and so on, right? Here in this last part, students, we are going to understand how all these scenarios were changing here in India, and finally how this cabinet mission plan, they came to our country and they decided on the formation of a new constitution or the composition of a new constitution, and also transferring the powers to our country, right, to the leaders of our country. So these are some of the points that we are going to understand in this part. Now, what was this cabinet mission plan? Why did it come to India? What was the situation before? All these questions are to be answered in this section. Now, before this, students, what did we learn? We talked about Subhash Chandra Bose, how he was a great nationalist leader, and what were his contributions in the nationalist struggle that we are talking about, right? So here, when we are talking about the cabinet mission plan, what were the changes taking place before that, and what led to this formation or the coming up of this plan, right? We are going to understand that now. Now, serious attempts were made by the British government to find a solution to the demand of dominion status by Indians. Now, do you remember the dominion status that we had already talked about? Yes. Here, we talked about the dominion status that was offered by Lord Irwin, correct? And then Motilal Nehru, he framed a constitution, right? That was a temporary constitution there that was formed by, he formed a report in which he talked about how the constitution would be there, what were the reforms and so on. But he focused on the self-governing part, right? The self-governing India under the British government. He talked about these changes there. But here what are we seeing? By the time of Second World War, many changes took place, about which we have already discussed in our last part, right? When we are talking about Subhash Chandra Bose, we saw that there were two main powers, right? Central Axis and the Allied power. And when we are talking about the beginning of the war, now Germany was on the offensive side. Now Germany was attacking different regions, and all these powerful countries, they were quite furious about it, correct? So therefore they wanted to defeat Germany. Now Britain was in a critical condition. Why? Because of the defense expenditure, of all the expenditures that was happening in the war, of buying planes or arms, ammunitions, and so on, correct? So the situation for Britain was quite bad, and here also they were facing the criticism from the Indian people. Now they were also pressurized to get the support of Indians in the war. Why? Because the Indians, they decided that they are not going to help Britain in the war, and in return of it they decided to give the dominion status to the people of our country, correct? So this was all about the Cripps mission. Because of this, a mission was sent to India that was headed by Stanford Cripps, and the mission was known as Cripps Mission. So they wanted the support of Indians in the war, and in return they promised that they are going to give this dominion status to the people living in our country. But somehow this Cripps mission, it failed. People were not ready to help the Britain in war, right? So after that, cabinet mission plan took place. it came to our country, India. Now the cabinet mission, as the name suggests, was a it consisted of a 3-member from British Parliament. So this was the cabinet mission plan. This cabinet mission plan, or the cabinet mission exactly, it comprised of 3 members of British cabinet who were sent on a mission to India. And who were these member students? So these members were Lord Pethick Lawrence, Sir Stafford Cripps, and A.V. Alexander. Right? So the mission was headed by Lord Pethick Lawrence. Look at this image here. Muhammad Jinnah along with the 3 members of the British Parliament here, and as you can see, you have to remember these names here when we are talking about the cabinet mission plan. So when did this cabinet mission plan arrive in India? So it was on March 24, 1946 that the cabinet mission, it arrived in India, and finally they had negotiations with Jawaharlal Nehru and other Congress leaders, and apart from that they also had negotiations with the Muslim League leaders. Now you have to remember here that when we are talking about the political situation of our country, there were 2 main parties here, the Congress party on one hand and the Muslim League on the other hand. Muslim League was headed by whom? So it was headed by M.A. Jinnah, as you can see in the image here. Now what was the main aim of cabinet mission plan? Before the cabinet mission plan, there were so many missions and there were so many the members of British Parliament who were sent to India and to have some negotiations with these leaders. Were they successful? No, students. These missions, they were not successful. But finally, the cabinet mission plan, it somehow was, it had the proposals, and they were very much hopeful that it will be a successful plan in our country. So what was the main aim? Main aim was not to lay out the details of a constitution for India, but to set in motion a machinery whereby a constitution could be settled by Indians for Indians. So basically the main aim was not to finalize the details of a constitution, to lay out a detail of the constitution. But what did they want? They wanted that the Indians themselves, they should draft a constitution for their fellow Indians. So this was the main idea of the cabinet mission plan. The mission proposed to secure an agreement on the method of framing the constitution to the discussions with elected representatives of British India and the Indian states on proceeding and preparing. So this is how they were going to finalize the whole constitution. Framing of the whole constitution. Having discussions with the elected representatives of the British India and the Indian states. Right? Now, what were the main proposals of the cabinet mission here? So, they proposed to set up a constitution body. That was the Constituent Assembly. That was later formed in the year 1946. You have already learnt in political science also, but here we are going to discuss it, right? So, the formation of Constituent Assembly, a body that is going to finalize the main features of the Indian Constitution. The second was to propose or set up an executive council with the support of main Indian parties. So an executive council was also to be formed with the support of all main Indian parties. But at that time, there were 2 main parties, the Congress party and the Muslim League. Right? Here we are seeing that when the mission, they had their own proposals. Here we are seeing that all the parties, the two parties that we are talking about, the Congress Party and the All India Muslim League, they were not coming in agreement. And the cabinet mission plan, they wanted these two parties to come to an agreement and finalize one final plan for whole country. But was it possible, students? No, because each of these parties, they had their own ambitions, they had their own aims for their country. Now, what were these proposals that were these parties talking about? So here we see that the cabinet mission plan, they rejected the demand of All India Muslim League. Now, what was their proposal or what was their demand? So the demand was for the partition of India and formation of another country, that is Pakistan. So this was the main demand of the All India Muslim League, that they wanted a Muslim dominant country. Now, was it possible at that time? You see, during 1946 only or before that, the people of All India Muslim League, they decided to form another country or another territory for their Muslim population. But here we see that the members of cabinet mission, they totally declined this proposal of All India Muslim League. However, the members of this cabinet mission, they proposed a three-tier federation for India. Now, what was that? So it was to be integrated by a minimal central union government in Delhi, which would be limited to handling foreign affairs, communications and defense. Now, what are we seeing here, students? Now, these are some of the points that you have to keep in mind, because some of these ideas were now used in the constitution making. The features of the constitution contain some of these ideas, right? So, the cabinet mission plan or the members, they proposed for a three-tier system. Now, this was during the time of 1946 that we are talking about. At that time, a three-tier federation was proposed. Now, what was that three-tier federation here? Three-tier federation? So, that could be divided between the provinces, sections and one center, right? So, here we are seeing that it has to be integrated by the central union government. But this central government, it was to be given some limited powers. And it was related to what? So it was related to handling the foreign affairs, communications and defense. So these three powers were given to the central government. And apart from that, all the other sections, the provinces, they were now to be autonomous, right? Free to rule according to them. Now, each group was free to have a separate constitution. Like I told you, this cabinet mission plan was of two types here. One was the long-term plan and one was the short-term plan. Short-term plan included to have an interim government, this temporary government, formation of the interim government, and long-term program emphasized, they focused on making the Indian constitution in a proper way, right? So these were some of the proposals of the cabinet mission here. Now, another important point that you have to keep in mind here. In the cabinet mission plan, what are we seeing? We see that three sections were made. There were three sections, each named as Group A, Group V and Group C. And in all these groups, we have certain provinces. Now, if you look at Group A, this was Hindu majority. Why? Because all the provinces in Group A, there the majority of population were Hindus, right? So, the Madras region, Bombay, United Province, Bihar, Central Province and Odisha. These provinces, they came under the first section, that is Group A, that was Hindu majority. Look at this map here, students. This is your Group A region, right? The second here is Group B, that is Punjab, Northwestern Frontier Punjab and Sindh region. Somewhere here this. So here actually it has been written wrong. This is your Northwest Frontier Punjab, Punjab and Sindh region. Right? And the third group is Bengal and Assam. This is Bengal and Assam. This is Group C here. The label is wrong. Let's not go on the label. The map that I am pointing out is correct here. So Group C is Assam and Bengal. These are the central provinces region. United Province, Central Province, Bihar, Odisha, Madras and Bombay region. That was Group A. And these were the princely states. The yellow part here, princely states. Right? So this is how they thought of dividing the provinces in the cabinet mission plan. Now, number of seats in the provinces will be proportionate to the population of the province. And this is how the voting would take place. Now, seats in each province will be allotted to different communities. Now, what are we seeing here? Let's go to the map again. Focusing only on map here. Not focusing on the label. Let's focus on the map. So, here we see that number of seats in provinces will be proportionate to the population of province. So, let's say in Punjab province, number of seats in this province. Now, there is a table given in your book, students. You can look at the table in order to understand this proportional representation system. So, according to the population of that province, number of seats had to be divided. Right? Seats in each province will be allotted to different communities. Now, in each province, all these seats were to be divided according to the communities. Now, this is how the whole setup was going to be as proposed by the cabinet mission plan. So, here we see that in British India, total number of seats were 292. Chief Commissioner province had 4 seats and Indian seats there were 93 in total. As you can see in the map, all these regions here. So, each province had a seat there, right? And it was allotted to different communities. And these were the total number of seats in different sections. Now, representatives of British India were to be elected by single transferable vote. This is again followed in our constitution. Now, why is this single transferable vote quite important, students? Because it helps in proportional representation, about which we have talked just right now. What do we mean by proportional representation? So, according to the population, the number of seats have been allotted. That is the proportional representation, right? According to the proportion of population, and it was to be elected by this single transferable vote. Again, setting up of advisory committee on rights of citizens, minorities, tribal and excluded areas. These were some of the other points related to the cabinet mission plan. Also, the cabinet mission plan, it objected the ideas the whole idea of cabinet mission plan finally was objected by the main parties. So till here students, we have understood what were the main features or what were the proposals of the cabinet mission plan, right? Through the map we have understood it as well, correct? So here, what was happening now? Both the parties, the main parties that we are talking about, and the main parties are the Congress Party and the All India Muslim League. These two parties, now they were objecting the whole idea of cabinet mission plan. Why? Because they wanted their own constitution according to them. They were not happy with the demands made by the All India Muslim League. The All India Muslim League, they wanted a separate country for them, Pakistan, that was Muslim majority country, and so on. But what happened? In the end, they agreed on the formation of the Constituent Assembly. But somehow, the elections were held. Eventually, they agreed with some of the points of cabinet mission plan, and the Congress Party they formed their government at the center, right? In provinces, when we are talking about the Muslim dominated areas or the Muslim regions, group B and C, here we see that Muslim League, they also won in the provinces as well. So this is how the whole scenario ended here. But again we see that what happened? Mountbatten Plan came in, 1947 Indian Independence Act came in, and finally India was given independence and partition of our country took place. So somehow the whole cabinet mission plan was a bit of failure. Now there are different interpretations about the plan here. We are not going to go that much in detail. So here you have to just understand the main proposals that were given by the cabinet mission plan, right? So they wanted to offer some changes, some reforms, and how the constitution was to be made by the Indians and for the Indians, right? And how they introduced this 3-tier federation and 3 sections, Group A, Group B and Group C, right? Based on the population as well. So this was all about the cabinet mission plan, student. Like I told you, in 1947, now they were pressurized with the government and they had to leave India after all. So India got independent in the year 1947. So this was all about the cabinet mission plan. Getting back to our exercise section here, in long answer question, there is one question that says, describe the main features of cabinet mission plan. So talking about the cabinet mission plan, we have discussed a lot of points. So you can talk about the main proposals of cabinet mission plan, but before that, when did this plan come in? 1946. Who were the members? Talk about the members and what was their main aim? Not to lay down the features of constitution, but to prepare to let the Indians prepare a constitution for the Indians. But there were some proposals that were laid down by the cabinet mission members as well. You have to talk about all these proposals. Now there are a set of proposals that we have discussed in great detail in this part here. So this is how you are going to answer this question. Now students, we have completed the whole chapter here. We have talked about various movements. We have talked about the idea of Satyagraha and role of Mahatma Gandhi in our Indian national movement. Apart from that, we have also talked about another nationalist leader whose name is Subhash Chandra Bose and his Indian National Army. At last, we also talked about the cabinet mission plan in great detail here. So this is how the chapter ends. So I hope that you have understood all the important points here. Thank you.